In Parasyte, emotions are a point of interest, and a case is made that they are ever present whether we like it or not. The protagonist of this tale begins his descent into being unfeeling following the tragic death of his mother. Her body is taken over by a parasite, immediately killing her, and then using said body, pierces his son's chest, creating a literal and figurative hole in his heart. After this, the changes begin. The once human and perhaps a little awkward boy is now sharper but robotic. Hell, he even throws a dead dog in a dumpster instead of burying it like a normal person. I think Migi explains it best. From his perspective, Shinichi is more logical, thinks faster, and is less distracted. For Migi, these changes within Shinichi are considered good since he's a parasite that sees Shinichi as a vehicle for his survival. In fact, they are traits very similar to his own, as he too sees himself as something that just wants to survive. All of the parasites see themselves in this way. Tamura Reiko is not an exception to this. Her decision to have a baby is for the sake of experimentation. Now after this point, Murano, Shinichi's girlfriend, begins to see that he is not being himself, and Shinichi's life turns from one fight to another. The line between parasite and man was blurring for Shinichi, as he became more like them and thus less emotional. All three of these characters, Shinichi, Migi, and Tamura Reiko, all have a relationship to emotions. All three reject emotions within themselves, and Shinichi is the only one to see it as a problem, mostly because Murano does. But the fact of the matter is, you can't reject emotions altogether, for they exist and happen at their own pace. For Tamura Reiko, as mentioned before, has something as precious as a baby. Initially seeing it as just an experiment to understand humanity, and her other experiment being laughing in front of a mirror, and yet with both of these experiments, at the end, she finds herself to be emotionally invested. She found that laughing in front of a mirror was pleasant. Pleasant, those are emotional words. And her actions showcase a complete lack of reason. Why would a being who sees themselves as a vehicle to survive, and ultimately fragile, sacrifice their life to ensure the child in her arms wouldn't succumb to any harm? It doesn't make sense. It's irrational. It's emotional. She always had that capacity within herself, and only at the end could she see that. Migi also goes through the same arc. The same being that complimented Shinichi of his rationality found himself doing the same for Shinichi. The same boy he stated to just be a vehicle for his survival. The same Migi who couldn't understand Tamura's actions. Once again, irrational. He calls him a friend. At death's door, he mentally understood what was happening, and yet he didn't really provide any explanation. What he noted was his feelings. That at death's door, there was a profound feeling of loneliness. What he noticed was his feelings, and he only saw it prior to death. There's a phrase that's uttered throughout this series, this idea of having a hole in one's heart, and that in order to mend it, you have to go to the source. Both Migi and Tamura Reiko ponder their existence, so I think it's very fitting that perhaps the hole in their hearts are mended at death's door. For that is where their source lies. For Shinichi, the hole is mended when Tamura transforms into his mother, holding a baby. At this moment, without waiting for Shinichi to understand, his emotions flow through him. The source of his trauma was in front of him, something that he hadn't been able to mourn yet, a feeling that had remained untouched, and finally he was able to heal his heart. Murano knew Shinichi was an emotional person, but the trauma caused an emotional block. But once the block was released, Murano states, "Shinichi, welcome back." Murano sees that as the real him, the foundation, the core. The thing is, the hole in the heart was mostly a metaphor. For all these three characters, the disregarding of one's emotionality seemed to only delay the emotions. They were always there, just waiting to flood in. Once again, I want to reiterate that at death's door, what people noticed isn't an idea or a thought, but an emotion, the source.